Welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, Predictive Index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to Talent Optimization, Creating Your Dream Teams. We're thrilled to have you with us for this session, why we talk about what is talent optimization. And I have with me today, Matt Poepsel, who is the Godfather of Talent Optimization with the Predictive Index. And Matt has a very, very interesting journey of becoming a people leader inside of organizations. And that background led Matt to help to create this framework that we're calling talent optimization. So Matt, welcome to our podcast today.
Tracy, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just start with what the heck is talent optimization?
So talent optimization is a relatively new discipline. It's all about trying to connect our business strategy with our talent strategy in order to produce optimal business results.
And when we talk about those optimal business results, and I like to get in the head of my podcast listeners, right? So we have HR professionals, we have CEOs, and when we say business results, I know that some of my HR professionals are going, okay, I get what business results is, but what does it mean to me?
Sure. And absolutely, that type of business success is a team sport. So it's all types of different people inside the organization, and even in some cases outside of the organization, working together to produce that outcome. So as an example, if you're a retailer, perhaps you're trying to grow your same store sales. Maybe you're trying to control costs in some way. If you're a technology company, maybe you've got a new product, you're trying to bring it to market. Whatever that business result is that represents that next stage, ideally of growth, or trying to reduce risk, or trying to control cost, any of those positive business outcomes, that's going to be the business result. Now, for a given team, it's going to be a subset of that. Very few teams have the entire organization's strategy as their strategy, but it's always connected ideally to some aspect of that strategy and driving it forward. Those are the results we care about the most.
Awesome. And so with talent optimization, we're working to create those so that they're measurable, because so often when we say business results, we talk about these business results, but nobody's measuring them. And then we're like, did we succeed or not?
Yeah, exactly right. And I think a lot of times what I suggest is when I'm talking to either senior HR leaders or I'm talking to the C-level or any sort of business leader, I always like to think about your most primary operating period. Maybe you're on a fiscal year that's a calendar year. When you start January and you say, we're about to launch into this new period and we have all these hopes and dreams for our business, that's all what I refer to as business strategy. What's the strategic intent of the firm? When you get to the end of that period, let's say December 31st for a fiscal year, and you look back, those are the results that you would have delivered. So how often do those results fully match the strategic intent? Not always. And it's that business result and the shortfall that we're really most interested in when we talk about that. If we're talking about an HR person who's trying to make sure that we understand all the different people practices, aligning them with business results are the best way to get the momentum going that we need to work most constructively with the business.
Right. So if I'm going to take this and put this into kind of a tangible task that HR is doing on a daily basis, okay? And so often we call these our people plans, right? So, hey, I need to hire 15 skilled laborers for a construction company that I'm working with, right? So is that result we're looking for hire 15 laborers, or is the result we're looking for hire 15 laborers that meet X, Y, and Z metrics so that we can actually get the business results, which would be $2 million worth of a project done within 30 days, right?
Yeah, exactly right. You're trying to work backwards from that ultimate business result. I mean, if we're making some hires, then the question is what types of people to do what types of work in order to produce that business outcome. Maybe we want to take on a second project, a larger project than we've ever done before. We need more skilled laborers to help us conduct that work. Well, what's the type of work that's required? Making sure we have all that in our context when we're making the hiring, that we onboard people as naturally as possible relative to the work they're being asked to do, who their teammates are. All of these people plans, as you pointed out, all take place within the business context. And that's the part where talent optimization really fills a void in connecting every people practice in the business to that business context.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you hit on that I just want to talk about in a little bit more detail is we're matching people to the job that needs to be done, right? It's not just, hey, Matt, you're great. I know you. Guess what? You're in this position, right? We're really looking at this is the job that specifically needs to be done. And is Matt a behavioral fit for this job so that he'll do it over the long period of time and I'm not turning him over in 3 months and have to hire somebody new?
Yeah, exactly right. I always like to say it's almost two sides of the same coin. What's the work to be done and who's doing the work? Too many times we find that we divorce the two and we start to say, what's the work to be done? Well, I have to put up a job advertisement or a job description on my website. So I go to Google search and I try to find and cobble together what sounds like a good job description. But then candidates start showing up. Now I'm meeting people and I'm looking at their resumes. How do you connect those two? Well, how do I connect the work to be done with who's doing the work? And to your point, the behavioral match of the individual's skills and temperament and their preferential work styles should be as best a match as possible to that work requirement, the behavioral aspects of it in particular.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, if this behavioral match, cognitive match job assessments isn't ringing true for you yet, go back and listen to episode 1 of our podcast where we dig a little bit more into this. So I just want to bring everybody up to speed as kind of like, what are they talking about of how we bring these together? Because it's so important, because it's almost like the easy button. We're shortcutting what sometimes takes hours and hours and hours in recruitment and goes and takes it much smaller time periods, which is a win for everyone.
Absolutely.
And so one of the things that you shared with me ahead of time, Matt, that I absolutely loved was, hey, sometimes organizations are paying a higher than necessary people tax in the execution of their business plan. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, people tax, when I describe it, it's any type of friction that exists within an organization. That represents the type of tax. So, for example, miscommunication, poor and ineffective decision-making, the frustration that can take place, having to have a meeting to describe why you're frustrated with another cross-functional team member's competing priority to yours. All of these represent an ineffective or a less than optimal way of working with one another. And because they're people-centric in nature, they represent that type of a people tax. Now, nobody wants to pay a tax. And the reality is, if I only act the way that I am naturally inclined to act, for example, without regard to what the people who are on my team need from me as their leader, for example, or as a manager, supervisor, giving them certain types of work, then all of a sudden that's going to show up as that form of a people tax. And I can give you an example if you'd like, Tracy.
I loved an example.
So I had this woman that worked for me. She was a fabulous person. Her personality was very different from mine. I'm an idea guy. I like to talk things out. I'm fast and loose with the details. She was exactly the opposite. And she was wonderful at the operational job that I was asking her to do. But I was not setting the table and giving her instructions with as much rigor and detail as she would like. So she was frustrated and she was worried that she was going to make a mistake or not meet my needs in some way. Yet here I was not giving the full example of this is exactly what I need done or how, or make sure that I provide enough detail in my instruction. So by having this conversation together, we came to that realization that she was looking for more in terms of that type of structured, what are the rules? What's that box for me so I can operate within it? Because that was a natural fit for her personality. I said, geez, if you hadn't said that to me, I would have felt like I was micromanaging you. And she said, that's exactly what I want. You're not micromanaging me. You're telling me what winning looks like. And after that, we paid a lot less of a tax in the form of me being misunderstanding what her needs were, or her being frustrated or concerned, distracted in some way from the work to be done. So that was an example of a small people tax that we were paying with two people who were getting along fine. And she was doing a great job, but it could have been even better. So by minimizing that tax, all of a sudden we got a better business result. Her output went up slightly. Her frustration went down slightly as a result of that lower people tax.
So I'm curious, as, leaders of people inside of organizations and ensuring that every individual is fulfilled in the work that they're doing, by listening and engaging with her, what I'm hearing is not only was she more engaged, but you actually built a stronger trust with her.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And where there's trust, we often find that things move a little faster. The trust is there. The the connection is there, the types of work that we're able to accomplish together, all of it gets better because the tax gets in the way. It's unnecessary. It's counterproductive. It's just extra, and it's friction. It's something that we want to try to minimize to the greatest extent possible. And I think that that's a great point that you bring up there. Yep.
So I know for me, because I had something similar where I'm, very fast, loose with the rules, kind of details are like, give me bullet points, right? So, and many of my staff are also ones that they need structure, and I need them to have that to be successful so we can get the tasks done in our organization that's needed. And the thing that has saved me almost every single time, and I do say saved me because I just don't see it, is when I pull out of the predictive index, either the one-on-one relationship guide or the manager strategy guide, I can sit down and go, oh my gosh, they need to be managed in this way. And I would have never seen that. So sometimes even in a conversation, I feel like there's still a miss. So having like something to fall back on almost as a safety net has saved me several times.
Oh, it's absolutely true. The tools don't steer you wrong, but you have to use them. And I remember one of my earliest experiences, and I had just been trained in the predictive index, and I was giving a readback for the first time. And it was a readback of somebody whose personality was almost exactly the opposite of mine. And I was getting ready to do this readback, and I'm researching. I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to break it to this poor woman that she has this type of personality? And so I started going through the readback, and I was almost sheepish in describing her personality because I was hearing it with my ears. And she was hearing it, and her face lit up. She smiled so broadly, and she's like, oh, sounds so wonderful. You've captured me exactly. And I was like, really? Because it just didn't sound right to me. But she was like, you've nailed it. I absolutely love that structure. I love understanding. And so it really opened my eyes at the time to say, we're not all the same. And that's actually a really good thing. That type of diversity is needed on our teams. It's needed for us to be creative. It's needed for us to pursue more complex configurations of goals. But boy, if you're going to have very different people working with one another, the way you and your staff, or my example from earlier, then you really have to not only understand and appreciate differences, I say you even have to celebrate those differences among your team members.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the key is knowing how do we reduce that people tax so we can celebrate it, because it is a balance that we have to be able to ensure we're paying attention to and have the trust and the communication to talk about it.
And that brings us back to the HR professional. These people have dedicated their lives to the way that people operate inside organizations. And I don't think there's any higher calling for me personally when I think about talent professionals today. However, if you're dealing in an organization that has 200 employees, let's just say, what likelihood is there that all 200 are going to have the same dedication to getting the people part right, that will have made that type of study and that type of priority for this important work being done in organizations? And the reality is they don't. And so when you start looking at a tool set, like you mentioned, the manager strategy guide, if I had a magic wand, I'd give a manager strategy guide to every leader in the world who had people who directly reported to them, so they would understand who they need to be to help those people be at their best. Now, all of a sudden, as a talent professional, you're like, I don't scale if I have to spend all this time with all 200 employees, but if I have a tool set to do some of my heavy lifting for me, I have a fighting chance. So it's like, I definitely find that the tooling removes subjectivity. It removes going by gut, the way a lot of managers feel like, oh, I'll just wing it and do what feels right. That could be the worst thing, could be the best thing for some, but it could be the worst thing for others. And start to use the tools as a way to remove that guesswork. And it allows a talent professional to be more scalable and to take their expertise and their influence and really extend that reach throughout the organization. I think that's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. And you want to know what I picked out of this conversation that I heard the loudest? Is me as that HR manager or director. I don't have to do it all because I have the support to support my leaders to become leaders for their people. And that is key.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that, a lot of the leaders, there's a couple different types. Some want to do the right thing, but don't know how. Mm-hmm. Others want to do the right thing and they instinctively know how. That's a subset in my experience. But then I think that being able to have the tooling and to have the understanding that I need to dedicate myself to the craft of managing people if I'm going to be an aspiring leader in an organization, that's critically important. If you ever run across a manager or a leader who says, I really am interested in the technical aspects of my role, less so in the people part, That's not somebody that I want to look at in my organization to put more and more people and more responsibility on them when it comes to managing and leading others. You have to have that natural interest in getting good at the people part. Having said that, that's where the tools come in to feed that natural interest on the part, especially of early career managers who need some support and some scaffolding until they develop a better feel for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So for my CEOs that are out there listening, this is the key part of this conversation for you to key into, because this is where the marriage comes in between the HR folks and the C-suite to say, how do we do this thing together to get those business results?
Yes. And I think that if you're a CEO in an organization, all things being equal, you have demonstrated sufficient people skills to allow you to get to that level. What I see sometimes is some CEOs just assume, because it's been a long time since they were in the trenches, that all of their managers are naturally as good as they are. And the reality is that is absolutely not the case. And so it's a very, very small percentage by definition of managers who will go on to become CEOs. But the CEO needs to look and say, what is happening on the floor? What's happening out inside my organization? What am I doing to give people who are leading others in my organization the tools that they need to be successful in doing that? And a lot of times, unfortunately, we can't afford to take managers and put them through 3 weeks of training in a classroom environment, but we can give them the tools that they need. We can give them the science that they need. Those things scale almost infinitely if we'll allow them to. So I feel that you're bringing up a great point here. In partnership between the CEO and the talent professionals, now all of a sudden we can set the mandate to make sure that our people leaders have the tools that they need, and also take our talent professionals and make sure that they can be in the best position to equip them with those tools, that they understand how to connect them. And that takes us back to the very beginning of our conversation, to drive the business result. There is a positive ROI, because at the very fundamental, every business problem is a people problem. If you don't want to pay that tax, you got to give the leaders the tools that they need to lead their people.
Absolutely. And when we look at the tax that we're paying, if we're no longer paying that people tax, i.e., CEOs dealing with people problems that have, turned into lawsuits or whatever else, or HR dealing with employee complaints, or not able to hire because there's a Glassdoor rating of a 4, or whatever it is, now we can spend the time on doing these short, quick, and sweet trainings with our leaders so that they can become better leaders. So I always love to look at it and say, okay, what are we replacing that time with? Because it doesn't disappear. So we need to be intentional about creating this and doing an and both as we're moving the organization towards meeting those goals while up-leveling the people and the leadership at the same time.
Yes, I agree 100%.
And so this gets into, and we've talked about it a little bit, Matt, but well-designed business strategy is being put at risk by lacking people practices.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, a lot of times when you think of, like in my example from earlier, when we start the period, we hopefully have had a well-reasoned and thought out business strategy. But a strategy by definition is a possible future. It's not a guaranteed future, right? So if I want to go back to my retail example, if we're trying to increase same-store sales, we may have a strategy in place to do that. Well, that's great. But over the next 12 to 15 months, what's going to define in large part whether or not we're successful is the way that the people plans, as you pointed out, the nature of individuals working as a collective in order to make something like that possible. So when I say that a strategy is put at risk, what happens oftentimes is if we don't understand the team configuration and we don't understand the natural strengths and gaps between individuals and what we're asking them to do, then we're not in the best position to coach and develop them. Or if we make hiring mistakes and we hire somebody who was great at the interview, lousy at the job, happens all the time, that creates strategic risk as well. And if we don't fully invest in our leaders, our people, our employees, what I call leaders at every level, then all of a sudden, we create either turnover risk or people who are less engaged, bringing less of their discretionary effort to work. All of these things collectively create strategic risk. So now you have an organization whose leadership team works really hard on a strategy, but then if they abdicate the people responsibility part or they don't empower the talent professionals, then they're taking unnecessary risks with that strategy. We can't have that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're going to go to landing our plane here, Matt. And with that, what we love to do is have kind of one takeaway for our CEOs and one takeaway for our HR professionals based on the amazing insights that we talked about today. So from what we've talked about, what's one thing that HR professionals can do to turn this conversation into action in order to get to those business results on behalf of their organization?
Yeah, when I'm coaching HR professionals, I always say follow the money. If you want to get the line of business's attention, you've got to follow the money. And it's either about increasing revenue, top line, if you will, trying to reduce expenses and cost, or reducing risks to the business. And I think that most business people I talk to are well-intentioned when it comes to the people part, but they're supremely busy and they can tend to be absorbed with the technical aspects of their business. I'm in an engineering company. I'm in a landscaping firm. I'm a contractor, where it might be. The day-to-day is often made up of very technical bits and bobs. The reality is that the people agenda is often saved for the very last slot of the executive offsite, time permitting, and it's very counterproductive. So in order to have the best chance of having the conversation that you want, regardless of where you are in the HR hierarchy, from strategic CHRO all the way down to feet on the ground doing the work, passing through your hands, the reality is that you put a business face on it. And so if I'm trying to get a hiring manager's attention, I'm going to ask questions about how this candidate is going to be moving the business forward in terms of, if it's a sales role, what's their quota? Even demonstrating a business interest and connecting those dots is going to be very powerful. And being able to understand how this person, if they're a lack of a behavioral fit, in the example, great interview, lousy at doing the job. If I'm trying to protect that business person, then I'm going to go back to, what is the business impact that we're trying to produce here? Well, we don't want quality issues. We want to have predictability, stability coming out of their output. Well, this person was great in the interview, but their personality suggests that they're more comfortable with taking risks, being creative, innovative, something that might be a great fit in some other role in the organization. So again, by drawing back to the business face and trying to follow the money, that's my recommendation for HR professionals, regardless of level in the org.
Thank you for that. And what about on the CEO or C-suite side?
I think that if you look at the talent optimization framework, you might mistakenly think that it's the domain of HR, when it is absolutely not. Talent optimization is a leadership framework. It is what leaders must do in partnership with HR and with their talent professionals in their organization. Surely when you look and you see business strategy, business results, that sounds familiar to me if I'm a business person. But when I see something like diagnose, which is an admittedly medical sounding term that was chosen by design, or when I see something like hire, I think, oh, that's really HR's problem. They put butts in seats. No. That is not how that works. It's really a partnership when you get into those people aspects of the business, because they're tied to your strategy intrinsically. They're tied to the business result. When you look back and you're missing a target, and something's on fire, then you're going to find that at the heart of that is a people decision that was made, or a people practice that was suboptimal. So when you look at, if you're the CEO and you look at a framework like talent optimization as a discipline, that is a leadership framework. It's not the domain of HR.
Great. Thank you so much. And as we wrap this up, if our listeners are interested in learning more about you or Predictive Index, where can they find you?
Certainly predictiveindex.com. You can read all about the tool set. Myself, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so certainly my last name is very recognizable. You can find me anytime. I would love to connect with you there and learn more about how I can help in any way.
Awesome. Matt, thanks so much for being on our podcast today. And if you're interested in learning more about Elevated Talent Consulting, you can find us online as well at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. So thanks so much for being with us today, and we hope that you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.